Hi, this is Gautam. For today's episode, we'll be looking at this book, Born a Muslim: Some Truths About Islam in India, written by author Ghazala Wahab. Now, even though the author hasn't divided the book into strictly three parts, there are three broad areas of discussion. First is regarding how Islam in India is undergoing changes in contemporary times. Second is the history of Islam in India and also history of Islam in general. And third is about the Islamic community in India, how Muslims in India are divided through several cohorts and several factors. The first part of the book has a detailed introduction in which the author explores her own life. It's mostly an autobiography where the author talks about Islam, her own exposure to the religion, slowly from her school to college days, and then how Islam has definitely changed, and the author sees a noticeable change within Islam in India. Now, beyond that, beyond the introduction, you see the author discussing that Islam or Muslims in India is not, one integrated community, but within Islam there are so many differences. Author talks about partition having a severe impact of Islam in India because the most number of most Muslims who migrated either to West Pakistan or the erstwhile East Pakistan back then, during those times were mostly the well-off Muslims and the literate Muslims. So post 1947, within Islam, the author writes, there was a clear-cut class division. There was a minority of wealthy Muslims in India. At the same time, there was a large majority who were impoverished, and you had this question, you had this statement of this missing middle, where your economic faction composing a middle class were mostly absent, and this economic inequality was the starting point post 1947, or at least from the 1950s. Beyond the class divisions, we also see that within Islam, caste is an important barrier. Now, this is not just for marriage, but also for community mingling and sharing of concerns within Muslims in India. And if you think about this caste system right now, today it is again an important political factor which is widely spoken because the so-called lower caste Muslims or the backward caste Muslims form the largest population, and this again prevents cooperation within the two different class and caste systems of Muslims in India. Author Ghazala Wahab, the differences among the Muslim community in India is even more amplified by the geographical differences. If you take the Muslims who live in the northern part of India, there is more exposure towards Turkey, Turkic culture or Persian influences in culture. And if you take Muslims who are in South India, there is more influence of Arabic culture. Because of these subtle differences, again, in terms of geography, again, the Islamic community in India is divided. Now, one might naturally ask a question: why should we try to understand the fractures within a community? Because it is not a simplistic Shia versus Sunni issue, which we mostly read about in newspapers or on television. Because it's not trying to present a representation that Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims are trying to catch each other's throats. But the point is, depending on which school of Islam you follow, the religious teachings of the Muslim theologians slightly differs, and these teachings naturally try to get amplified based on your class differences, based on your community differences, your class differences, based on which part of India you come along to. So these differences naturally create different cohorts of Muslims in India rather than what we try to perceive as a single integrated community. Now, the second part of the discussion becomes increasingly political. Now, take it with a pinch of salt, because once it becomes political, depending on your own political orientation, naturally the weightage you give to every chapter might vary, because these discussions are about minority politics in post-independent India. It is not restricted to 1950s or 60s, but to the entire time period, during different prime ministerships of be it Rajiv Gandhi or the present Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So during these discussions, based on your political leanings, the weightage you will definitely vary. Because minority politics, one way or the other in India, varies in different parts. At the same time, the author tries to link it with communal rights. What happened, 1969, 1980, 1992, and 2002. So the importance you give to your chapter or the relevance which you connect with the chapter will definitely vary based on your political readings. But the author tries to present her perspective on these parts. Now, it is a third part of the discussion which is much more debatable. It is regarding the history of Islam in India. Now, if you look at the author's argument on the proliferation of Muslim community in India, she predominantly talks about Sufism playing an important role. Now, I do not want to downplay the impact of Sufism, but it would have been much better if the author had taken a more a balanced stand where she has insisted on the concept of political conquest, being an important factor for the proliferation of Islam in India. At the same time, there was no mention of Islamic iconoclasm during the medieval history time periods. Maybe the author felt it was not relevant to the contemporary discussion. But when you deal with historical segment, when you try, if you really want to present a balanced opinion, a combination of Sufism and political conquest would have been much more acceptable rather than more weightage to Sufism alone. And then we have the discussion of proselytization missions in India by Muslim organizations. Now, again, this is a controversial topic because presently we have a play in the Supreme Court and the matter is still sub judice on religious conversions. And again, religious conversion is a pretty touchy topic because whenever a person converts from one faith to the other, there is always this problem of identifying whether it was done voluntarily or was the conversion done through any sort of force or coercion through financial incentives. So regarding this topic, I recommend that you read and then go for your own interpretation. But the more sensitive discussion, which I personally feel is reserved towards the later chapters, where the author talks about women issues in Islam. And I'd like to take at least two paragraphs from the text which talks about women issues. Muslim women and their issues are the most debated and protracted subject in Islam, even more than jihad. The best Muslim minds from the days of the Prophet and thereafter have been exercised and obsessed with the subject of women, what they should wear, study, eat, how they should bathe, sleep, how long they should grow their nails, what the decibel levels of their voices should be when they speak, how they speak themselves, how they should keep themselves chaste and yet desirable for their husbands, how they should be punished for offenses of commission and omission, what degree of beating is necessary for discipline, and so on. Given the volume of instruction manuals for Muslim women, one would imagine that the religion of Islam was revealed with the sole objective of taming the wayward women of the world and to keep them from having indiscriminate sex, when the truth is, in pre-Islamic Arabia, it was the male of the species which was sexually promiscuous. See, this discussion is relevant because today is December the 3rd, December the 2nd, 2022, and just 2 to 3 weeks back we had a controversy in Jama Masjid, Delhi, where the mosque had actually taken a unilateral decision that women are not supposed to enter the mosque premises because they were not, behaving as the mosque had expected. And due to public backlash and outcry, the mosque has taken back those instructions because the mosque had actually said that they kind of use the mosque as a park, as a recreational site rather they come for devotion. Again, it talks about the point that when it comes to religion, women do not have a say on several discussions. Now, I'm not trying to create an impression that you do not have religious, suppression of women in other religions, starting from Christianity to Hinduism or Buddhism or Jainism or whatsoever. Definitely, you take every religious structure, it is one way or the other more oriented towards patriarchy. But the point in this text is associated with Islam, starting with the triple talaq itself, where the author writes, the author has written that if the religious ulama, if the leaders themselves have taken proper measures on triple talaq, then there wouldn't have been a necessity for a government legislation which invalidated triple talaq, and that has actually made the issue even more troublesome for Muslim women. Because once you invalidate triple talaq, then the complexity then the issue of breaking outside a marriage becomes even more complex. So when it comes to religious structures, I do understand that there has to be modifications on the social system. But what the author writes is specific to women and Islam, because that is what the book is about. Now, before I close this review, I'd like to read a passage from page number 49, and it goes like this. Laila Tyabji, who comes from the family of bureaucrats, recounts an interesting conversation to convey how the Indian mainstream chooses not to see the Muslims beyond the stereotype. I once had a conversation with a retired bureaucrat who was making sweeping statements about Muslims being radical and tolerant. I interrupted him. I am a Muslim too, I told him. He was taken aback. Then, saying that I was an exception, he continued his rant. I interrupted him again and asked him if he had not come across any other Muslim in his entire career or while he was growing up in North India. I insisted that he think about it before answering. Gradually, he recalled a tailor who used to come to his house, then a carpenter, and then a few fellow bureaucrats that came to meet during the course of his career. In all, he managed to count about 14 Muslims he had interacted in his 65 years, and he called all of them exceptions. See, now I've told this, I've spoken about this in one of the earlier book reviews, the point regarding echo chamber, because social media is a trap. It kind of positively feeds you the same information which you like. That's how the algorithm works. So there is a tendency that you might get trapped in a belief that whatever you believe is what the world thinks, and that is necessarily correct. That is what I've stressed in one of the earlier videos, that if you're going to read Indian history, it is important that you get both the opinions of the leftist historians and the rightist historians, or those who are part of the government agenda and those who you personally think are not part of the government agenda. You get both those views, or if there are three or four perspectives, you try to add all of them, then go for a balanced opinion. That is the only factor which will enable you to get a holistic idea of truth, because what is truth itself will be a search which everyone has to ask for. So that is what the book tries to do. It tries to start a conversation. It tries to form it tries to understand why there is so much of distrust between different cohorts and sects within Islam, at the same time between Muslims and Hindus in India. So I'll talk about this fact again. If you have your own personal belief, it is definitely necessary that you need to amplify that and read books on that. Definitely improve your knowledge on that. Now, at the same time, you need to get a balanced opinion. You need to listen to the other side, and you need to establish channels of communication. And that is what the two paragraphs which the author has written is about. What is needed is more communication. What is needed is more conversation, so that we reduce the distrust between different communities, and that will enable us to create a healthy situation in which everyone can thrive. So that's it for this book's review. Meet you with the next one pretty soon. Bye for now.